Dr. Elena Reyes adjusted her translator pendant for the 12th time in as many minutes. The small crystal device felt impossibly heavy against her collarbone, much like the responsibility she now carried. Behind her, the curved hallway stretched back toward the human diplomatic quarters, sparse accommodations that, according to her handler, represented a generous accommodation for Earth's first conclave representative. Ahead loomed the massive osmium doors embossed with the symbols of 217 spacefaring civilizations. Humanity's symbol was noticeably absent. "They're ready for you, Dr. Reyes," chirped the Melosian aide, its translucent appendages gesturing toward the doors. The diminutive creature had been assigned as her guide, or her keeper, Elena suspected. "Thank you, Trill," she replied, smoothing down her formal diplomatic attire. The indigo suit with silver trim had been designed by Earth's finest couturiers to project both dignity and approachability. The designers had agonized over every detail, from the subtle iridescence of the fabric to the geometric patterns that would appear pleasing to the widest range of alien visual systems. Such considerations seemed absurdly trivial now. The doors parted with a subsonic hum that Elena felt in her molars. Beyond them stretched the Galactic conclave chamber, a vast amphitheater carved from a single asteroid, its terraced levels accommodating delegates of wildly varying physiologies. The chamber's design defied conventional architecture, simultaneously suggesting both ancient temple and advanced technological hub. Elena inhaled deeply, tasting the faintly metallic processed air. According to her briefing materials, the atmosphere was a precisely calibrated mixture designed to be tolerable, if not comfortable, for 97% of oxygen-breathing species. "The human delegate may approach," announced a resonant voice that seemed to emanate from the chamber itself. The words carried the distinct cadence of the Vorkadian language, all crystalline precision and mathematical rhythm, though Elena heard them in perfect English through her translator. 5,000 pairs of eyes, or their sensory equivalents, tracked her movement as she began the long walk down the central aisle. The Vorkadian Primarch, his exoskeleton refracting light into hypnotic patterns, didn't bother rising from his elevated seat. Even from this distance, Elena could discern the subtle positioning of his primary limbs, a posture indicating polite disinterest rather than respect. She forced herself to maintain a measured pace despite her thundering art. Earth's synapsychologists had spent months coaching her on appropriate body language for this moment. Confident but not aggressive, respectful but not subservient. Easy enough in theory. Some delegates leaned forward with obvious curiosity. Others maintained rigorous stillness that Elena recognized as the physical manifestation of disdain among certain species. A cluster of Zith representatives extruded eye stalks for a better view, their translucent bodies pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that her cultural training identified as amused condescension. "The clever primates finally join us," murmured a voice from somewhere to her left. Her translator rendered the words perfectly, though the speaker likely believed their subvocalization frequency beyond human hearing range. "Evolutionarily speaking, they're mere infants," came another whispered response. Their discovery of fold space technology was surely accidental. Elena maintained her diplomatic smile. Being underestimated had its advantages, as Earth's negotiating team had repeatedly emphasized. The Alliance species had reluctantly admitted humanity to observer status only after discovering Earth's nascent faster-than-light capabilities, technology that, according to their evolutionary models, humans shouldn't have developed for another 8 centuries. As she approached the central podium, Elena mentally rehearsed her carefully crafted opening statement. 342 words designed by linguistic specialists to be inoffensive across all known cultural frameworks, while still asserting humanity's readiness for galactic citizenship. She would deliver it, answer the predetermined questions, and retreat to her quarters. A simple ceremonial introduction. The Melosian aides gestured for her to take position on the speaker's platform, a subtly raised dais embedded with sensors that would project her image throughout the chamber and to observing worlds beyond. As Elena stepped onto it, She felt a slight tingling sensation as the platform adjusted to her biology. "Delegates of the conclave," she began, her voice steadied despite her racing pulse. "On behalf of Earth and all humanity." A piercing alarm cut through her words, its harmonic frequencies triggering immediate responses across the chamber. Delegates of various species shifted, extended appendages, or emitted pheromones signaling alert states. The Vorkadian Primarch rose swiftly, his exoskeleton now pulsing with acceleration patterns. "Conclave emergency protocols activated," announced the chamber's voice. "Priority transmission incoming." "Human delegate, you are dismissed for now," the Vorkadian Primarch announced, barely glancing at Elena as emergency protocols transformed the conclave chamber. Holographic displays materialized throughout the space, showing star charts, transmission data, and scrolling alien text. Elena retreated from the platform, unsure of protocol during an emergency. Her Melosian guide had vanished, presumably recalled to more important duties. For several minutes she stood awkwardly at the chamber's periphery, watching the controlled chaos of the galaxy's most powerful governing body responding to crisis. "You might as well return to your quarters," suggested a tall, reed-thin being with iridescent scales. The translator identified them as Cetilian, a mid-tier Alliance species. "These deliberations will continue for many cycles, and observers aren't permitted during security assessments." "Thank you," Elena replied, grateful for the small kindness. "May I ask what's happening?" The Cetilian's inner eyelids flickered, their equivalent of a shrug. "Some kind of transmission from beyond the map sectors. Happens occasionally. Usually turns out to be natural phenomena." Their tone suggested they didn't entirely believe this assessment. 12 hours later, Elena paced her quarters, restless and isolated. Earth's diplomatic course had prepared her for many scenarios, but being completely sidelined during a potential first contact situation wasn't among them. Her communication requests to Earth remained pending authorization according to the terminal in her room. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal a junior Vorkadian official Elena recognized from the pre-conclave briefings. "Dr. Rice, your presence is requested in monitoring station Epsilon 12, the official stated flatly. "Follow me." They traversed a series of increasingly narrow corridors, descending several levels below the main conclave chambers. The architecture grew noticeably more utilitarian, the polished grandeur of diplomatic spaces giving way to practical efficiency. Monitoring station Epsilon 12 proved to be a cramped, dimly lit room filled with display screens and sensory equipment. 3 beings hunched over consoles, a 6-limbed Merlonian, a gelatinous Quux whose body pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and a humanoid Triskelion whose triple pupilled eyes never seemed to blink. The human observer, as requested, announced Elena's escort before promptly departing. The Merlonian, Zax Turl according to the identification glyph on his environment suit, chittered something the translator rendered as a dismissive acknowledgement. "Take position at Monitor 7. Do not touch anything. Your presence is merely procedural inclusion." Elena nodded, moving to the indicated station. The screen displayed fragmented waveform analyses of what she assumed was the mysterious transmission. Standard protocol for new conclave members, she realized. They weren't actually seeking her input, just maintaining the appearance of inclusivity while the real experts worked. Hours passed. The Quux occasionally rippled in apparent frustration. The Triskelion muttered complex mathematical sequences. Zax Turl's appendages moved with increasing agitation across his interfaces. Elena observed quietly, her linguistics training automatically cataloging patterns. Something about the transmission structure nagged at her subconscious. The fragments displayed certain regularities that seemed familiar somehow. "Excuse me," she ventured after nearly 3 hours of silence. "But has anyone considered that these pattern groupings might represent emotional cadence rather than pure data?" Zax Turl's sensory appendages stiffened. "Explain." "Well," Elena said, choosing her words carefully. "The transmission contains mathematical sequences, Yes, but the spacing and intensity modulations resemble patterns we see in Earth's poetry when translated into binary code. There's a rhythm that suggests communication designed to evoke emotional response alongside information transfer. The Merlonian emitted a high-pitched sound her translator didn't bother rendering. Anthropomorphic projection. Primitive analytical error. Return to observation status. Elena fell silent, properly chastised, but continued studying the patterns. As her shift ended and another human observer arrived to maintain the pretense of inclusion, she downloaded several screenshot fragments to her personal device, technically against protocol, but irresistible to her researcher's instincts. In her quarters that night, sleep proved elusive. Elena projected the transmission fragments above her bed, rearranging them experimentally. Something about the mathematical progression reminded her of her doctoral research on pattern recognition across linguistic families. On impulse, she reconfigured the data into a three-dimensional matrix rather than the traditional two-dimensional waveform the Alliance scientists were using. The result nearly took her breath away. The transmission wasn't just data. It was a complex, interwoven tapestry of mathematical concepts and what could only be described as emotional harmonics. The pattern pulsed with a rhythm reminiscent of a heartbeat, expanding and contracting in ways that conveyed concepts beyond mere information. They're not just sending coordinates or technological specifications, Elena whispered to herself. They're expressing longing, curiosity, caution. Whoever sent this wants to be understood as beings with feelings, not just intellect. She worked through the night, applying linguistic analysis frameworks from Earth's first attempts at designing messages for potential extraterrestrial intelligence. By dawn, Elena had constructed a rudimentary translation matrix suggesting the transmission contained elements of greeting, reassurance, and warning. Communications deliberately designed to be emotionally resonant across species boundaries. The Alliance's purely mathematical approach would never decode it. They were looking for algorithms and data packets, not poetry. Elena needed space to think. After another frustrating session in Monitoring Station Epsilon 12, where her insights were systematically dismissed, she sought refuge in the Conclave's botanical gardens. The sprawling biodome housed specimens from hundreds of worlds, maintained in discrete environmental bubbles that occasionally overlapped in carefully calculated transition zones. A meandering path guided visitors through rainforest density, desert sparsity, and everything between. Few delegates bothered visiting. Most species considered such recreational spaces inefficient, making it perfect for solitude. Elena found a small bench beneath an earth maple tree, one of several Terran specimens included as a diplomatic courtesy. The familiar rustling leaves provided comfort after days of alien sounds and sensations. She activated her personal device, reviewing her unauthorized analysis for the 100th time. "You seem troubled, human diplomat." Elena startled, nearly dropping her device. A slender figure stood nearby, body draped in flowing garments that shimmered with subtle iridescence. Her translator identified the speaker as Turellian, a relatively recent addition to the Alliance, admitted only 43 years earlier. "Forgive me," the Turellian continued, 6 golden eyes blinking in sequence. "I am Kella, Junior Diplomatic Attaché. I did not mean to disturb your contemplation." "Not at all," Elena replied, quickly deactivating her display. "Just homesick, I suppose." Kella's eyes shimmered with what Elena recognized as a Turellian expression of empathy. Unlike most Alliance species, Turellians possessed remarkable empathic abilities, a trait that had delayed their admission to the Conclave, as many elder species considered emotional sensitivity evolutionarily suspect. "Your discomfort radiates like thermal waves," Kella observed, gesturing to the space beside Elena. "May I?" Elena nodded, and the Turellian settled beside her, movements fluid and graceful. Up close, Elena noticed the faint shimmer of scales beneath translucent skin. "The Conclave can be overwhelming for newcomers," Kella offered. "When my species first joined, I spent many cycles hiding in these gardens." Does it get easier? Elena asked. Different, not easier, Kella replied with a musical chuckle. The elder species believe they've transcended emotion in favor of pure rationality. They haven't, of course. They've simply encoded their emotional responses into procedural algorithms they pretend are objective. Elena found herself smiling at the unexpected candor. That's surprisingly refreshing to hear. Refreshing because it's true, or because you didn't expect honesty from an Alliance species. Both, perhaps. They sat in comfortable silence for several moments. Elena sensed Kella had more to say but was weighing her words carefully. Something troubles you beyond standard diplomatic discomfort, Kella finally observed. Something specific to the current situation. Elena hesitated. Sharing her analysis with an Alliance diplomat could violate protocol, potentially damaging Earth's tenuous position. Yet something about Kella's directness inspired trust. The transmission, Elena admitted. I believe the Alliance's approach to decoding it is fundamentally flawed. Kella's eyes widened slightly. That is a significant claim. I know how it sounds, Elena sighed. The arrogant newcomer thinks she understands something the advanced species don't. But, she stopped herself. But you do, Kella finished. Show me. Elena studied the Tyrellian's face, seeking signs of deception but finding only genuine curiosity. Making her decision, she reactivated her device, projecting her three-dimensional model of the transmission. The Alliance analysts are treating it as pure mathematical data, but look at the modulation patterns here, and here, Elena explained, highlighting sections. These aren't just information packets, they're emotional expressions. Whoever sent this was trying to communicate feeling alongside data. Kella leaned closer, 6 eyes focusing intensely on different aspects of the model simultaneously. Remarkable, she whispered. This structure. It resembles the ancestral songs of my people during the Great Migration. Exactly. Elena's excitement overcame her caution. It's designed to be understood by strangers, but not just intellectually, emotionally. They want us to feel something specific about their intentions. And what do they intend? Kella asked softly. They're afraid, Elena replied. Not threatening. Afraid. Of us, or more specifically, of how we might respond to them. There's a recursive caution built into every sequence, like they're approaching a potentially dangerous animal while repeatedly signaling peaceful intentions. Kella's skin rippled with pale blue bioluminescence, a sign of deep contemplation. Few in the conclave would understand this approach. Emotional communication is considered primitive, which is exactly why they missed it. Elena concluded. They're looking for advanced technology in the signal, not advanced empathy. This analysis must be shared with the conclave, Kella stated. They won't listen to me, Elena said, frustration evident. I've tried suggesting this perspective, but I'm consistently dismissed. Perhaps, came a new voice from behind them. You simply need the right allies. Elena and Kella turned to find a tall, angular figure standing at the garden path intersection. Elena's translator identified them as Felix Confederation, a technologically sophisticated but politically marginalized coalition of species. Ambassador Nix Rotha, Kella acknowledged with a formal gesture. How long have you been listening? Long enough, the ambassador replied, compound eyes gleaming with interest. Long enough to recognize a perspective the Primarch and his supporters would prefer to ignore. Elena's quarters had never been designed to accommodate multiple species simultaneously. What began as a discreet meeting between 3 concerned diplomats had, over the past 9 days, evolved into something unprecedented in conclave history. Please mind the atmospheric barrier, Elena cautioned as a serpentine Dralid diplomat slithered through her doorway. The methane mix is on the right side. Her living space had been transformed. Temporary environmental bubbles accommodated species with incompatible breathing requirements. Furniture had been rearranged to support anatomies ranging from vertebrate to crystalline to amorphous. The room's environmental controls trained under demands never anticipated by their designers. 12 species were now represented in what Nix Rotha had dubbed the Midnight Coalition, a name that made Alina smile despite the gravity of their purpose. Each member shared a common trait. Their perspectives were routinely marginalized by the Alliance leadership. The High Command meeting concluded 6 standard hours ago, reported Vexari, a young Vorkadian whose iridescent exoskeleton lacked the status ridges of elder members of his species. His presence was their greatest coup and highest risk. As junior aide to the Primarch himself, his participation constituted a serious breach of hierarchy. And, prompted Kella, her skin pulsing with concerned colors. Vexari's sensory appendages flattened against his carapace, a gesture of distress. They've authorized a sterilization fleet, launch scheduled in 3 planetary rotations. A ripple of communication, some vocal, some chemical, some electromagnetic, passed through the gathered representatives. Alina felt her stomach tighten. Sterilization, she repeated. They're planning to destroy the signal source without attempting communication. Standard protocol for Category 7 anomalous transmissions, Vexari confirmed. The leadership cited statistical similarities between this signal and transmissions from the discordant era. Nyxrotha's compound eyes clicked as focusing lenses adjusted. The discordant era. Of course, they would reference that particular historical bogeyman. Alina looked between them, confusion evident. I'm not familiar with this reference. An uncomfortable silence fell. Many representatives exchanged glances, their universal translators struggling with concepts deliberately omitted from official Alliance histories. The discordant era is not included in materials shared with probationary members, explained Tisril, a Morethian philosopher whose crystalline form refracted light in hypnotic patterns. It refers to a period approximately 8,000 cycles ago, when several species with unconventional evolutionary paths joined the early Alliance. Unconventional how? Alina pressed. They prioritized emotional and artistic development alongside technological advancement. Kella explained, her voice soft. Their cognitive frameworks embraced paradox rather than resolution. They considered multiple contradictory truths simultaneously valid. The Alliance leadership deemed them evolutionarily incompatible with galactic stability, continued Nyxrotha. The official history states they voluntarily separated from Alliance space. But they didn't, Alina guessed, noting the careful phrasing. No, confirmed Vexari. Sensory appendages now pressed flat in the Vorkadian expression of shame. They were systematically eliminated through a series of quarantine actions that sterilized 87 inhabited systems. Alina felt physically ill. Genocide. You're describing genocide. The Alliance prefers evolutionary correction, Tisril noted, crystal facets darkening. The mathematical anomalies in the current transmission match communication patterns from those eliminated species. The prevailing theory is that some survived in distant regions, evolving in isolation. And now they're reaching out, Alina whispered, not knowing the Alliance's response would be to destroy them. Again. Unless, interjected Kella, we can prove they represent no threat. All eyes turned to Alina's 3-dimensional model, now expanded and refined through the collective insights of the Coalition. What had begun as her linguistic intuition had evolved into a comprehensive translation framework, revealing the transmission as a complex greeting combining mathematical concepts with emotional context. We've made significant progress, Alina acknowledged, but we still don't have enough to convince the Conclave. They'll dismiss our work as speculative at best, treasonous at worst. Then we need more, declared Nyxrotha. Human, your species possesses a unique perspective that sees patterns where others perceive only chaos. What would you do with unlimited computational resources? Alina considered the question carefully. I'd create a comprehensive response using the same dual-channel communication method, mathematical precision carrying emotional resonance. If they reply using the framework we establish, it proves they're intelligent beings seeking dialogue, not mindless anomalies to be sterilized. My people can provide the quantum computing capacity, offered Nyxrotha, but bypassing communication protocols will be challenging. Leave that to me, Vexeri said quietly. But understand, if we do this, there's no returning to our former positions. We will be challenging the fundamental philosophy of the Alliance itself. The conclave chamber hummed with subdued conversation as delegates assembled for what most believed would be a procedural session. The sterilization fleet's launch had not been publicly announced, merely classified as a security operation requiring formal approval. Elena observed from her designated observer position, heart pounding beneath her formal diplomatic attire. Their plan hinged on protocol and precedent. As a probationary member, Earth was entitled to make one formal statement before any military action involving previously uncontacted species. The rule existed primarily as a ceremonial courtesy. No probationary statement had ever altered an Alliance security decision. Delegates will come to order, announced the Chamber's amplification system, voice resonating with artificial perfection. The Primarch recognizes Security Administrator Zoltarek. A towering Vorkadian in ceremonial armor moved to the central platform. Honorable delegates, I present Security Resolution K-339, authorizing immediate neutralization of quantum anomaly detected in Sector 87 Delta 12. Technical analysis confirms 97% probability of Category 7 threat pattern. Elena noted how carefully the administrator avoided terms like communication or intelligence. The transmission was being presented as a navigational hazard, not a potential first contact. Resolution approved for final vote, declared the Primarch. As per conclave inclusion protocols, the Earth representative may deliver a brief statement before proceedings continue. This is a courtesy only and does not constitute deliberative input. Elena rose, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon her. The path to the speaking platform seemed miles long. She clutched a standard data tablet containing her prepared statement. The statement Vexeri had assured her would be entered into the official record and promptly ignored. But the tablet also contained something else, the complete translation of the Lumine message alongside historical records pieced together by the Midnight Coalition. Records deliberately buried in the Alliance archives. As she reached the platform, Elena paused. Everything in her training urged caution, diplomacy, and respect for established protocols. Earth's position was precarious. Antagonizing the Alliance could have severe consequences for humanity's future. Yet 41 billion lives hung in the balance. Delegates of the conclave, she began, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Protocol permits me a brief statement regarding Resolution K-339. Restless shuffling suggested many delegates were already tuning her out, preparing for a perfunctory delay before the predetermined vote. I will use my time to present new information regarding the transmission from Sector 87 Delta 12. Elena activated her tablet, but instead of reading her approved statement, she interfaced it with the chamber's holographic system. Immediately, the central display filled with her three-dimensional model of the transmission. What you are seeing is not a quantum anomaly, Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. It is a complex greeting combining mathematical concepts with emotional resonance, a communication method specifically designed to be understood across species boundaries. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Primarch's exoskeleton flashed warning patterns, but Elena pressed on, highlighting specific elements of the model. These patterns here and here mirror communication structures found in your own historical archives, specifically communication from species that existed during what you call the discordant era. The chamber erupted. Several delegates rose in protest. The Primarch's voice cut through the chaos. The human delegate is exceeding authorized parameters. Security. Remove. They didn't threaten you with their difference. Elena's amplified voice overrode the commotion as she activated the second part of her presentation. Historical records deliberately omitted from official Alliance histories. They frightened you with their possibility. The holographic display shifted, now showing comparative evolutionary tracks of Alliance species versus those eliminated during the discordant era. The data revealed a systematic pattern. Species that developed emotional intelligence alongside technological advancement had been systematically purged. The transmission originates from descendants of those you attempted to eradicate. Elena continued, her words landing with devastating precision. They developed a unique civilization that synthesizes technological advancement with emotional capacity, the very combination the Alliance has engineered out of its member species for millennia. The chamber fell silent, a silence more profound than any Elena had experienced. In the front row, a senior Vorkadian counselor's exoskeleton began exhibiting stress fractures, luminescent patterns pulsing arrhythmically. "What you call evolutionary superiority," Elena said, her voice now gentle but unflinching, "is actually evolutionary reduction, the systematic elimination of cognitive diversity in favor of a single developmental path. But diversity, including so-called primitive emotional processing, creates resilience and innovation that uniform development cannot achieve." The Vorkadian counselor collapsed, exoskeleton emitting a high-pitched harmonic as regulatory systems failed. Medical personnel rushed forward as shocked delegates watched the unprecedented physiological crisis, an emotional response overwhelming systems designed to suppress such reactions. "This session stands in recess," the Primarch declared, his crystalline voice edged with frequencies Elena's translator rendered as controlled alarm. "All delegates will reconvene in 16 standard hours." The chamber erupted into chaos as Elena was escorted, firmly but not roughly, from the speaking platform by conclave security officers. Their touch communicated professional restraint rather than hostility, but the message was clear. Her unprecedented disruption would have consequences. In the antechamber, Elena found herself isolated in a small waiting area, presumably while officials determined her fate. Earth's diplomatic status hung by a thread, and she had just taken molecular shears to it. "That," came a familiar voice, "was either the most courageous or most catastrophic diplomatic act I've witnessed in 216 cycles." Elena turned to find Ambassador Nix Rotha of the Felix Confederation standing in the doorway, compound eyes glittering with unreadable emotion. "Ambassador," Elena acknowledged, unsure whether to expect censure or support. "I'm surprised they're allowing visitors." "They aren't," Nix Rotha replied, mandibles clicking in what Elena had learned was amusement. "But confusion creates opportunities for those accustomed to navigating bureaucratic gaps. You've fractured the conclave, human. 17 member species have already demanded verification of your claims, while 33 others call for your immediate expulsion." Elena's stomach tightened. "And the rest?" "The rest," Nix Rotha said, moving further into the room, "are experiencing something unprecedented in recent Alliance history: genuine uncertainty. Your presentation has triggered review protocols dormant for millennia." Before Elena could respond, another figure appeared in the doorway, massive, insectoid, and radiating an aura of controlled power that made even Nix Rotha straighten respectfully. "Ambassador Helktora," Nix Rotha acknowledged with a formal gesture. Elena recognized the imposing figure, the senior representative of the Quitari Assembly, one of the Alliance's most pragmatic and militarily formidable founding species. The Quitari were renowned for ruthless efficiency and unwavering adherence to calculated self-interest. "Leave us," Helktora commanded, multifaceted eyes fixed on Elena. Nix Rotha hesitated only momentarily before complying, sensory appendages signaling reassurance to Elena as he departed. Alone with the towering insectoid diplomat, Elena maintained composed eye contact despite her racing heart. Helktora's mandibles moved in complex patterns as inner mouthparts clicked thoughtfully. "You have caused considerable disruption, Dr. Reyes," the ambassador stated finally, voice a resonant vibration that her translator rendered in precise, unadorned language. "That wasn't my primary intention, Ambassador," Elena replied carefully. "No," Helktora agreed, compound eyes shifting to observe her from different angles. "Your primary intention was preventing the neutralization operation. The disruption was merely a necessary tactical approach." The Quitari's accurate assessment surprised Elena. "You understand my motivation." The Quateri understand pragmatic actions taken to achieve defined objectives. Helk stated, "Your methods were unorthodox, but your evidence." The massive being paused, mandibles working. "Your evidence is compelling." Elena struggled to mask her shock. The Quateri had been among the Alliance's most consistent supporters of evolutionary purism, the philosophy that justified eliminating aberrant species. The Quateri value efficiency above ideology. Helk continued, seeming to read her thoughts. Recent analysis suggests the Alliance's evolutionary orthodoxy has produced diminishing returns. Cognitive homogeneity reduces adaptive capacity. Your presentation merely confirmed calculations already underway. You're saying the Quateri have been reconsidering Alliance philosophy. We reconsider any approach that becomes suboptimal. Helk corrected. The statistical models are unambiguous. The Alliance has experienced declining innovation indices for 12 consecutive centuries, despite technological advancement. The ambassador moved closer, lowering her voice. The Vorkadian leadership will attempt to discredit your evidence through procedural challenges. They cannot permit questioning of evolutionary orthodoxy without threatening their status position. What are you suggesting? Elena asked cautiously. The Quateri Assembly proposes conditional support for verification of your claims, Helk stated, in exchange for certain concessions regarding future human-Quateri relations. Elena recognized the offer for what it was, pragmatic opportunism rather than ideological alignment. Yet such support could prove decisive. "I would need to consult with Earth's diplomatic corps," she replied diplomatically. "There is insufficient time," Helk stated flatly. "The neutralization fleet remains on schedule. Without significant counterbalancing influence, procedural delays will merely postpone the operation, not cancel it." Elena considered her options. Earth had authorized her to make binding preliminary agreements in emergency situations, an authority she had technically already exceeded with her unauthorized presentation. "What specific concessions would the Quateri require?" she asked. Before Helk could respond, a commotion erupted in the corridor outside. The door slid open to reveal Kella, her normally iridescent skin pulsing with urgent communication patterns. "Elena," the Turellian diplomat gasped, "something extraordinary has happened. Our homeworld's elders have broken millennium-old silence. They've transmitted ancient historical records confirming your claims about the discordant era. And more, they've revealed that Turellian myths about crystalline beings who ascended beyond during ancient conflicts." Kella's voice dropped to an awed whisper. "They were the Luminae. The beings sending the transmission were once our neighbors." The diplomatic vessel Concordance slipped into subspace with barely a ripple, its advanced drive systems representing contributions from 7 different Alliance technologies. Elena stood on the observation deck, watching normal space dissolve into prismatic streams of light. The ship itself represented something unprecedented. A joint mission crewed by representatives from 12 different species, operating outside standard Alliance command structures. 3 days had passed since the reconvened conclave session that shocked the galactic community. As species after species came forward with suppressed historical records confirming Elena's claims, the political balance had shifted dramatically. The sterilization fleet remained in orbit around the Alliance capital world, its launch suspended pending further investigation, rather than canceled outright. A face-saving compromise that allowed the Vorkadian leadership to maintain the appearance of control while effectively conceding to mounting pressure. "Remarkable view, isn't it?" observed Tisril, the Morethian philosopher's crystalline form refracting the subspace light into complex patterns. Many species experience profound emotional responses to subspace transit, though few in the Alliance would admit to such reactions. "On Earth, we call it awe," Elena replied. "The feeling of being simultaneously diminished and expanded by something greater than yourself. An elegant concept," Tisril acknowledged. "My people have a similar notion, though untranslatable directly. The closest approximation might be conscious humility, recognition of limitation as pathway to wisdom." Their philosophical exchange was interrupted by a proximity alarm. Red emergency lighting bathed the observation deck as the ship's automated systems announced, "Subspace anomaly detected. Emergency protocols activated." The Concordance shuddered violently as it dropped from subspace, structural integrity fields straining against forces they weren't designed to withstand. Elena gripped a support rail as artificial gravity fluctuated. "Status report," demanded Ambassador Helktora, who had emerged from the command deck, her massive insectoid form seemingly unaffected by the turbulence. "Navigation systems compromised," reported the ship's communication system. "Current location: unmapped nebula, approximately 78 light-years from planned exit coordinates." Elena exchanged concerned glances with Tizril. The mission brief had emphasized the experimental nature of their journey. Their destination lay outside mapped Alliance territory, requiring navigation calculations based partially on the Lumine transmission itself. "How long until systems are restored?" Kella asked, entering the observation deck with several other delegation members. "Unknown," replied the ship's systems. "Critical navigation algorithms corrupted during subspace transition." "This is unfortunate timing," Nix Rotha observed dryly, compound eyes scanning external sensor displays. "One might suspect deliberate interference." The implication hung in the air. Though the mission had received official sanction, many in the Alliance leadership would prefer it fail. A navigation accident that stranded them in uncharted space would be convenient for those wishing to proceed with the original sterilization plan. Elena moved to the primary sensor display, studying the nebula surrounding them. Something about its structure seemed familiar, though she couldn't immediately place why. "May I access the primary navigation interface?" she requested. The Vorkadian technical officer, one of the few representatives of the elder species who had supported their mission, hesitated briefly before granting access with a reluctant gesture. Elena studied the corrupted algorithms, recognizing the underlying mathematics from her analysis of the Lumine transmission. An idea formed, unorthodox, but potentially viable. "I believe I can establish alternative navigation parameters," she announced. "The nebula's quantum resonance patterns share structural similarities with elements of the Lumine communication framework. You propose navigating by emotional resonance patterns?" the Vorkadian officer asked, exoskeleton displaying skepticism patterns. "Not exactly," Elena clarified. "I'm suggesting that the mathematical structures underlying both the nebula's formation and the Lumine communication system share common principles. If we recalibrate our sensors to detect these patterns, we might establish relative positioning." "A creative approach," acknowledged Helktora after a moment's consideration. "Proceed." For the next 6 hours, Elena worked with a small team to implement her solution. The process required integrating intuitive pattern recognition, something humans excelled at, with the advanced computational systems of the Concordance. Several times, the Vorkadian officer nearly abandoned the attempt, only to be surprised when Elena's seemingly illogical adjustments yielded measurable improvements. Recalibration complete, Elena finally announced, exhaustion evident in her voice. Navigation systems show 93% functionality restored. The view screen shifted, now displaying a clear path through the nebula's complex structure. More surprisingly, they revealed that rather than being thrown off course, they had actually been pulled closer to their destination through a previously unknown subspace corridor. "It appears," Tizril observed with a philosopher's appreciation for irony, "that what we perceived as catastrophic system failure was actually an unanticipated shortcut." Kella studied Elena with newfound respect. "Your approach combined technical knowledge with intuitive leaps. Few Alliance species would have attempted such a method. Humans are comfortable with ambiguity," Elena explained. "We excel at finding patterns in apparent chaos." 6 months after first contact with the Lumine, Elena stood once more before the Galactic Conclave. The chamber had transformed almost beyond recognition. Crystalline structures now extended from the walls and ceiling, creating prismatic light patterns that shifted subtly with the emotional currents of the assembled delegates. Where once the elder species had dominated the elevated tiers, representatives from every recognized civilization now occupied equal positions throughout the chamber. Elena wore a simple Earth diplomatic uniform, unadorned except for a small crystal pendant, a gift from the Lumine representatives who now moved gracefully through the assembly in their engineered crystalline bodies that housed consciousness as flowing columns of iridescent light. "The Conclave recognizes Dr. Elena Reyes of Earth," announced the chamber voice. No longer the artificial construct of the Vorkadian leadership, but a harmonious blend of tones from multiple species. As Elena approached the speaking platform, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. The diplomatic mission's arrival at the Lumine Descent Swarm had revealed a civilization of breathtaking advancement, not in technologies of destruction or domination, but in the harmonious integration of consciousness with natural systems. First contact had unfolded not through traditional alliance protocols, but through Elena's framework of cultural exchange, beginning with shared artistic expressions before progressing to philosophical concepts and finally political discussions. The Lumine had observed the alliance for centuries through quantum entanglement networks, recognizing in humans a potential bridge between different modes of existence. "Delegates of the Conclave," Elena began, her voice steady and confident. "Today I present for ratification the Galactic Concordat, a framework for interstellar cooperation founded on principles of cognitive diversity and mutual flourishing." A holographic display materialized above the chamber, showing the elegant structure of the proposed agreement. Unlike the hierarchical systems of the old alliance, the Concordat established collaborative frameworks valuing different evolutionary approaches as complementary rather than competitive. For too long, our galactic community operated on the premise that advancement could be measured along a single axis, that biological and technological optimization represented the sole measure of evolutionary success. Elena continued, "The Lumine have shown us a different possibility, that consciousness evolves not through uniformity but through diversity." From his position in the chamber, the Vorkadian Primarch rose. His exoskeleton, once a uniform crystalline structure, now bore symbolic modifications indicating philosophical evolution, irregular patterns, and asymmetrical elements incorporated in deliberate contrast to traditional forms. The Vorkadian consensus acknowledges the validity of this perspective, the Primarch stated, voids containing harmonics previously eliminated from his species' communication. "We measured advancement by technological achievement and biological optimization. Humans showed us that understanding different modes of thought is itself an evolutionary advantage." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber, some vocal, some electromagnetic, some expressed through color changes or pheromone releases. The diversity of communication itself embodied the Concordat's principles. "The histories we uncovered during these past months reveal a pattern of loss," Elena continued. "Each time we eliminated a cognitive framework deemed incompatible, we diminished our collective capacity for adaptation and innovation. The Lumine preserved what we attempted to destroy, the integration of emotional intelligence with technological advancement." Ambassador Helctora of the Quateri rose next, her massive insectoid form now adorned with symbolic elements representing philosophical exchange with previously dismissed traditions. "The statistical models are unambiguous," she declared. "Cognitive homogeneity produces short-term efficiency but long-term stagnation. The Quateri Assembly formally endorses the Concordat as the optimal approach for continued advancement." One by one, representatives from across the galaxy voiced their support. Even species that had initially reacted with alarm to the Lumine revelation now acknowledged the benefits of the new framework. The vote, when it came, revealed near unanimous support. A few abstentions, but not a single opposition. As Elena concluded her address, a Lumine representative named Isheril moved forward, crystalline form catching and refracting the chamber's light. With graceful movements, Isheril manifested a crystalline sculpture capturing the moment of first contact between humans and Lumine. Alina's hand extended toward a column of light, both figures poised at the threshold of understanding. The sculpture rose slowly to a permanent position in the chamber's center as Isheryl's thoughts resonated through the shared translation network. From those we underestimated came the words that united us all. The gathered representatives rose in a wave of acknowledgement, not just for Alina, but for the principle she represented. That true advancement came not from domination or uniformity, but from the embrace of different ways of being.